Yeah, okay. So we are having a session, and the session is for Chidimma Nwanya, and she will be taking us accessibility, implementing web accessibility. Yeah. So Chidimma is a front-end engineer. She has a bachelor's degree in computer engineering from University of Lagos. Unilag people, amen. And she just recently completed a master's degree in computer science from Middlesex University, London, where she researched web developers' knowledge on web accessibility and developing countries. So Chidimma will be joining us virtually, and please, with a lot of joy, make welcome Chidimma Nwanya.
Hi everyone, my name is Chidimma and I'm a front-end engineer, and today I'll be talking to you about implementing web accessibility. So these are the three main areas I'll be talking about today. So what is accessibility? Why is accessibility important? And how can accessibility be implemented? Now, one might ask, what is accessibility? What is web accessibility now? Web accessibility is the practice of making sure that your website is usable by as many people as possible. So when we say as many people as possible, we're talking about the disabled people, we're talking about old people, we're also talking about people that are able-bodied, and, in some situations, they might not be able to use the website because of situational influences. Now, one might ask again, why is accessibility important? Why should we care about accessibility? Now, the first is there are over 1 billion people that are disabled, and that is amounting to about 15% of the world's population. So when you think about it, and you think about the fact that you're creating a website that over 1 billion people might not be able to use, you have to rethink creating that website. So this is one important factor. Now, the second thing is accessibility promotes usability. People with disabilities can benefit from this. For example, adding captions to videos, or using keyboards, or using your keyboard to access a website. For captions on videos now, let's just assume someone is in a noisy environment, for example, and the person cannot really hear the video. Now, captions on that video will make it easier for that person to follow through with the video. Now, the next thing is, it is the right thing to do. Why shouldn't we want to care about other people? It's the right thing to literally care about other people. Now, think about it. You create a website that is not accessible. You're literally discriminating people that are disabled. And finally, because it is the law, there is actually a disability law in Nigeria that prohibits against discrimination of disabled people. I'm sure many people don't really know about this law, but there is something like that in Nigeria. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about is the principles of accessibility. What are the principles of accessibility, the guidelines? How do you make sure that your website is accessible? How do you go about implementing this? Now, the first is perceivable. When you say your website should be perceivable. Perceivable means that information should be presented in a way that it is perceived by other people. For example, providing alt text on non-content images, or rather providing alt text on images on your website. So someone that is disabled, someone that is blind, for example, would be able to use that using a screen reader. Another one is adding captions on your videos, like I said earlier. The next is operable. The navigations on your website should be operable. Basically, all functionalities should be available from the keyboard. Now, how they will scroll and all of that should be available through the keyboard. Think of a quadriplegic. A quadriplegic is someone that does not have that has limited functions from the neck down, and they cannot really use their hands to go through a website, but they have just limited functions of their fingers. Telling that person to use your website and use the cursor, use these two fingers to scroll and all of that, it's not going to be, it's not going to be easy for the person. But being able to use a keyboard, being able to use some keys on keyboard is something that will be able to be possible. So when you're creating your website, make sure that it is operable. The next is understandable. The information and the user interface should be and must be understandable. This means that you should make text content readable and easy to understand. Any jargon or acronyms should be explained. So let's just assume someone comes into a crypto website, for example, and the person sees WAGMI, and you're like, okay, what is WAGMI? What is WAGMI? You have to go to Google to understand what WAGMI is. Yeah, we know that is a crypto acronym, that is a crypto lingo, but a normal person might not really understand. So having explanations for such lingos on your website is important. And finally, your website should be robust. This means that you should maximize compatibility with future and current assistive technologies. Now, let's go over to how to implement accessibility. Who is in charge of implementing accessibility? Is it the developer? Is it the designers? Are you talking about the content creators, project managers? Whose job is it to implement accessibility? If you chose the developers, you're partially right. If you chose designers and developers, you're also partially right. At the end of the day, accessibility is everyone's job. It is everyone's job to make sure that your websites are accessible. Now I'll go over, different people and different things that they have to do to make sure that websites are accessible. I'm going to start with clients and stakeholders. Now you might ask, a client does not write code. How would they implement accessibility? You do not necessarily have to write code to implement accessibility. There are different ways you can help people that, implementing accessibility to do their job. Now, the first is request for the team to implement accessibility. While I was doing my master's thesis, I carried out a research, and I found out that a high percentage of developers said that when clients request for accessibility, they were, more inclined to actually implement accessibility. This is to show you that there's motivation to implement accessibility when clients request for it. Do you understand? So make sure that, your employers, you should make sure that you are requesting for accessibility to be implemented. The next is providing trainings and workshop on accessibility for the team. Make sure that everybody on your team has an idea of accessibility, how to implement accessibility. That way they will have an idea and they will literally know what to do when it's time to actually do the work. Then the last tip is to make sure that all content design and development team has an idea of accessibility. This is also, going with the second point about providing trainings. The moment you provide trainings for your employees, they will definitely, be more inclined to, implement accessibility, implement what they've been taught. So we're going to go over to the next set of people, and that is the project managers, the people we love, the ones that disturb us all the time. So how can project managers implement accessibility? Now, the first is at the requirement gathering phase. Project managers should realize that they are very critical to the process of accessibility. Think about it this way. If a designer has implemented accessibility designs, everything is going on well, they've done the right thing, and the developer isn't clear on how to implement this, at the end of the day, the end product is not going to be accessible, and that's just the truth. You need to also realize, you need to know what compliance level you're going for. Are you going for A, double A, or triple A? You need to know what compliance level you're going for that particular website. Now, the next is plan for accessibility during the planning phase. Think of accessibility as a requirement, not an afterthought. The moment you think of accessibility as a requirement, it's going to be, integrated into the beginning of the project from the, through the software development lifecycle, now from requirement gathering to design to development to testing. Plan for accessibility during the planning phase from the beginning to the end. And that is one way you can actually help. The next is have a plan for accessibility changes. For developers, reading RICA guidelines, sometimes it can be very complex. You might require specific people with technical knowledge or technical expertise on accessibilities. Now, when you're having accessibility challenges like this, it is normal, do you understand? Because there are sometimes that you have to read maybe a particular resource, or you might not really understand it, then you have to go and read other resources, and all these things, they take time. So project managers, when you're planning for these particular projects, you have to plan for accessibility challenges like this. Now, the next is have plans to maintain web accessibility. Web accessibility isn't a one-time affair. The guidelines are always changing, and the reason why the guidelines are always changing is because the world as we know is always changing too as well, so you have to be prepared. The first RICA guideline came out in 1999. The latest version we're using now, that's RICA 2.1. I think it came out 4 years ago. That's 2000 and 2018. The most recent one that is going to come out is going to come out in 2022. That's this year in December. I also read somewhere that WCAG 3.0 is also coming out. They started drafting it, they started writing it out, and there would be a new color contrast. So it's possible that the color contrast we're using now, the color contrast designers are using now, maybe in 2-3 years time, it might not really be as accessible as we think. So you also have to make plans to actually maintain your website on accessibility too as well. Now I will go over to our lovely designers. So designers, how can you implement accessibility? Now the first is the foreground and the background contrast. Now look at these two images, or rather look at these two texts. Now, for the first one, the one to my left, that is 21 to 1. Now, the foreground and the background are in contrast. You can easily see this. Now, for the text to my right, that's ratio 1 to 18 to 1. The foreground and the background, they are literally almost the same thing. Now, I don't have I'm not blind or anything. I'm not partially blind, but I still kind of find it really hard to read this. Now, think of someone that is actually partially blind or completely blind. How do you expect the person to understand this? I might be able to see this because I'm very close to my laptop right now. Now, think about if my laptop is very far from me, I would definitely struggle to read it. So when designing, think about colors, think about how to, make sure that your colors are contrasting and all of that. Now, the next is create designs for different viewports. When you're creating your designs, create designs for your phones, for your tablets, for your mini laptops, normal size laptops, and even as far as big monitors. Now, the reason for this is because imagine if someone is using your website and they're using it on their phone, for example, and maybe you have not designed what the phone design is going to look like, and they're literally using the laptop version on their phone. It's going to be hard because they have to keep on scrolling, maybe scrolling to the side, scrolling forward. It's just going to be very distracting, and the user experience is not going to be nice. So when you're creating your designs, make sure that you think about the different viewport sizes and how easy it is to scroll up and scroll down. If they're using tablets, if they're using phones, just think of that when creating designs. The next is forms should include labels. I know that sometimes we might want to create forms that, don't have labels because, labels might not, make it look nice, and, you want to be very creative in your design, but think of accessibility when creating your design. Forms should include labels because they're very important. The way, when you create labels, that is the way screen readers will be able to read out that particular form for people that are blind. The next is don't use color alone to convey information. Let me give you an example. Some days ago, I went to the bank to open an account, and I was told, input your password. And I typed, confirm password. And I was like, okay, I'm very sure that I kept the same thing. But the confirm password, the border was showing red. I was like, okay, what's wrong? I was like, maybe I did the wrong thing. I tried it again. I think I tried it for 4 times. Then the bank manager asked me, are you using special characters or maybe your name? And I was like, okay, I think I'm using special characters. That is a very, very bad user experience, bad accessibility experience. Everything was just bad with that design. And if somebody was not there to, that has experience on things like this, I would just be there thinking, what is wrong? There was no information to tell me that, this is what you're doing wrong. It was just a very horrible experience. So that is an example of using color alone to convey information. They just used red on the banner and that was it. The red wasn't even on both of them. It was just on one. So it made me feel like, my password and the confirmed password were 2 different things. So please think about that when designing. The next is provide easily identifiable feedback. I think this goes with the previous tip. So when you're, giving feedback, when you're designing, give feedbacks that people will easily understand. For example, if I was told that, do not use special characters, do not use your name, that would have made me realize that, okay, maybe this is something I'm doing and, I should change my password. So that is another one. And I think the last is going to be include media and image alternatives for your design. Now, the reason for this is think of someone that is in an environment whereby the internet is very slow and the images cannot load. What the person is just going to be seeing is a blank space. the person is not going to know what's going on because the image is still trying to load. But if you imagine having maybe a text by the side explaining what that image is all about, do you understand? That is a very good way to include image and or text in your design. So I'm going to go over to my people, the developers. So for developers, I think when it's time to implement accessibility, I think there's a VS Code extension. There's a VS Code accessibility extension. So you can download that, to also help you further. But for the first tip, I'm going to say use semantic HTML elements. I mean, I cannot say this, we always hear this all the time, use semantic HTML elements, because this will actually help screen readers when going through your websites. The next is include text alternative for images. I think this is one of the first things I heard when I started out as a front-end engineer. Or Chidimma, when you're writing when you're creating image tags, include text alternatives, make it descriptive enough, so that when screen readers are going through it, they can understand what they are reading. The next is associate a label with every form control. So basically, when you're using your form control, there's a form attribute on the label. Make sure that that is linked with the input itself, because the same thing, that is the way screen readers will be able to use the form. It is very important you do that. If not, you're making your website not accessible for people with disabilities, people that are blind, basically. The next is write code that adapts to assistive technologies. Same thing with, an example is including the 4 attributes on your tag. And lastly, the next is indicate the primary language of the website. Now, using the lang attribute on the HTML tag, this will also help assistive technologies to pronounce the words correctly. And lastly, implement an accessibility checklist at every stage of the development process. So when you're developing, at every stage of the process, at every feature, make sure that have a checklist for that you're following the right way, you're developing well. There's a checklist on the A11Y project. There's a checklist, you can go through that to make sure that you're doing the right thing, you're implementing accessibility at every stage of your development. This is very important. The next is the QA testers. So, when it comes to testing accessibility for the QA, testing websites, on web apps, there are several tools that can be used. We have the Axe, we have Wave, we have A-Checker, we have Lighthouse. Also, when testing accessibility, make sure that you use different testing tools, because different testing tools can give you different results. At the same time, I also say you should also include manual accessibility testing. Now, this is the first. This is Axe. From what you can see here, Axe is telling me that, and Axe is a Chrome dev tool. Axe is telling me that there are 11 issues. And I'm like, okay, I can see like description of the issues. If you click on it, you can see more details on some of the issues that, on how to implement accessibility. So Axe is saying there are 11. Now, the next is Wave. Wave is saying there are 0 errors, 2 alerts. And I'm like, okay. And I'm saying, congratulations, no errors were detected. Manual testing is still necessary to ensure compliance and optimal accessibility, just like I said. Now, Wave has given me different results. Axe has given me a different result. Now, the next is A-Checker. Now A-Checker, when A-Checker does its review, it uses the weaker compliance level AA. So it says there are 2 known problems, 29 likely problems, 72 potential problems. And you see different testing tools, different results, different ways that they are, giving out their information and all of that. Now, the last is Lighthouse. Now, Lighthouse is telling me I have 97% accessibility. So this is to show you that there are different tools that are giving different results. At the end of the day, you still need to do manual testing. Now, go over to content writers. Now, for content writers, how can they implement accessibility? Now, the first is to use headings to convey meaning and structure. When you're doing this helps screen readers to be able to differentiate header from body. Do you understand? That way, they will know that, when they come into the page, they see like a H1 tag, they know that, this is a header, the next one is the body. Do not use more than one H1 tag on one page. Do you understand? That is one thing you should take note of. The next is make link text meaningful. Avoid using things like click here, click me, touch me, all those things. Use more meaningful words like, for more, look at this, for example, now, for more information, click here. What information am I talking about? But look at the second one. Read more about Nigeria's Disability Act. That way, you're looking at it. A screen reader is going through it, and the screen reader is knowing that, oh, this is the link to, what I want to read right now. And also, the next is keep your content clear and concise. This is following the understandable principle of accessibility. Avoid complex write-up. Expand your acronyms on first use. Let's just assume you use maybe WCAG. On first use, explain what WCAG is. Then, when you're using it in the remaining text, you can just continue using the acronym because you've already explained it in the top. Now, write short and clear sentences and paragraphs. If possible, you should provide a glossary here for words that readers may not understand. Now, I'm going to end this presentation with a quote from Deborah Rue. Deborah Rue is an American businesswoman and advocate of rights of persons with disabilities. She says, accessibility allows us to tap into everyone's potential. Do you want to tap into your potential? Do you want to tap into your, someone else's potential? Implement accessibility. So these are some resources, the WCAG 2.2 draft. That's the one that's coming out in December. The A11Y project. This is the accessibility checklist. You can go through it. And the last is WAIM, that's Web Accessibility in Mind. This is a contrast checkout, check for your colors. All right, so thank you. I hope you guys enjoyed this talk and found it useful. If you have any questions, you can send me a message on Twitter, and I will be glad to answer your questions. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye.